plug-in hybrid should be the answer to all your large SUV quandaries. With zero emissions local motoring and plenty of power for driving in the country, it seems to answer all questions, not only for the large SUV, but also for the Ute, Australia's favourite vehicle. We're not talking about that today. We're here with Volkswagen's new Touareg R, the flagship performance vehicle in the range, ushering in the facelift of this vehicle. Driving range, it's got it covered. Call it about 750 Ks, with 50 of that from the electric motor and battery. Towing, it can pull a 3,500 kilogram brake load, power at 340 kilowatts. It's the most powerful production Volkswagen ever, and that's all extremely impressive on paper. But we're here in Victoria. We've driven this vehicle in Melbourne's surrounding suburbs and out here to the twisty high country to see how it translates to the real world. We're focusing on the flagship Touareg R today, but it's at the low end where VW's fought hard for pricing. The entry-grade 170 TDI now gets a 15-inch screen as standard, real wood trim, 19-inch alloy wheels, leather upholstery, power adjust seats with heating, and more for $86,790. That's a raw $2,450 discount on the face of it, but $10,970 when you account for the additional standard spec. Moving up to the 210 TDI Elegance, it gets an extra 40 kilowatts and 100 newton meters, 20-inch alloys, air suspension and swanky leather, and it sits just above where the old entry car was when specified with the Innovision pack at $99,990. A performance-oriented R-Line is available with trick suspension goodies and extra menace for $109,990 before on-road costs, and this R that we're focusing on today is $129,990, and it features huge 22-inch alloy wheels, more grunt, and some other goodies that we'll get into in a minute. The revised pricing means that not only the Touareg with its Audi Q7 and Bentley Bentayga DNA now competes more strongly with key rivals like the Lexus RX and Volvo XC90, it also has a chance of pinching customers who are looking at a Ford Everest Platinum V6. The changes for the 2024 Touareg are fairly subtle. You've got new bumpers and a slightly different bonnet design, but the big headline figure are these new LED lights. They're HD matrix and each light has 19,000 individual diodes. It means you can do some really cool stuff in the dark on country roads. I'll try and overlay some of that B-roll right now for you so you can see an example of what goes on. Finally, this Touareg R also gets 22-inch alloy wheels in the Estoril design, matching with the rest of the R range, and of course it's available in the flagship lapis blue colour. If you remember the pre-facelift Touareg's interior, the facelift is very similar, certainly in the high-spec vehicles, because this 15-inch Innovision cockpit is now standard, even on the base car. So big upgrade for the base model, and other changes are pretty limited, and it's mostly down to the graphics interface of the digital driver's display and the multimedia touchscreen. Otherwise, yeah, it's very familiar, and that also means it's very familiar to the Audi Q7, which is a really good thing when you're paying tens of thousands of dollars less than that Audi brand. Now, speaking of tens of thousands of dollars, that's how much more this R costs than the base 170 TDI, and to be honest, the interior treatment isn't totally different. You get nice perforated Puglia leather upholstery on these power adjustable seats, and you get blue stitching and this R steering wheel with perforated leather right here on the handles and a little bit of lapis blue inserts, but that's pretty much the end of the treatment. Otherwise, it feels very familiar. That's not to say it's bad, because this interior is handsome without being chintzy in the slightest. I am a big fan of the cabin of the Touareg, and I think it feels really sturdily manufactured as well. What about practicalities? Well, it's also very well served for that. You've got plenty of spaces to store your drink bottles and coffees. On a long drive, you've got door bins with space for one big bottle and two smaller bottles, two very generous cup holders here, and a nice little space under this storage cubby. That's also got a wireless phone charger in it and a single USB port, which is joined by two more USB-C charging ports under this very comfortable armrest. The technology interface is generally very good as well. There's only a few snags, that being if you're running wireless Apple CarPlay and you want to adjust the temperature of the aircon, it blanks out the Apple CarPlay screen, which can be a little bit frustrating, but it is much easier to use this HVAC system now that you've got a bunch of shortcuts along the side and the persistent menu that stays down there for the heated seats and the cooled seats that you get in this up-spec Touareg R. Because Volkswagen's targeting families with the Touareg R, the back seat is really important, and it's a big SUV, so you got plenty of space. Even at 188 centimeters, I got legroom behind my driving position. I got so much tow room because there's no compromise with a raised floor for a full battery pack like you'd find in an electric vehicle. And finally, I've got really decent headroom owing to the nice high roofline of this vehicle. Vision out though is excellent too. I can see plenty either side of this headrest, and this window is a nice big size with the window that goes all the way down, and you get rear sunblinds, which are really nice. And you'll know if you've ever tried to put a crappy aftermarket one on for your kids, it's just an absolute pain. So that inclusion is really much appreciated. You've also got ISOFIX tabs on both outboard seats, and of course, top tethers for all 3 seats. Speaking of, the seats are comfortable and supportive on the outboards, and although you do sit a little higher in the middle seat with a pronounced transmission tunnel, it's actually not desperately uncomfortable owing to the width of this car. It feels like you could legitimately fit 5 people in here in relative comfort for a fairly long amount of time. And a lot of light gets in thanks to the opening panoramic sunroof, but not so much that you feel like you're going to get super hot back here thanks to the standard privacy glass. Finally, finishing quality back here is lovely, soft touch on top here, and the ambient lighting trim from the front continues back here, as does the lapis blue detailing on the back of the seats. And in the flagship Touareg R, you get quad zone climate control, so 2 zones back here. There's heated outboard seats as well, pretty luxurious. And one of the coolest touches of this car, the way that the little USB-C and 12-volt port folds out from the back there. I just think that's a really neat solution. The Touareg R doesn't lose any boot capacity to the diesel version. It's still got 810 litres of space with the 40-20-40 seats up, and that expands to 1800 litres with those down. That is a really spacious boot, even for the large SUV category, and the backrest slides and moves around so you can adjust the space for the stuff you need in the back and the people you have in the rear seat. However, it's not perfect, and not only because it doesn't come in a 7-seat configuration, but there are some issues for the Australian market, which include the lack of a spare tyre. You've only got a mobility kit here, not even a space saver, and certainly no full-size tyre, which for a big vehicle like this, which is an excellent car to tour Australia in, yeah, it could leave you stranded. Of course, you could stick one in here, but that's going to take up a bit of boot space. Love to see that addressed on the next gen Touareg. Otherwise though, as I said, the boot is fantastic. You've got these neat little carabiners to hold the charging cables in place, and Volkswagen does supply all the charging cables you could need for this AC charging vehicle. And you've got this nice little boot mat, and there's even a cargo net under the floor, as well as ways to fold the seats down remotely with a couple of little fold tabs. You can't see all the power stuff under here, but you can see a little bit of the V6 petrol engine. It develops 250 kilowatts on its own, and it's allied with a 100 kilowatt electric motor that's mounted on the rear of the 8-speed transmission. It's a ZF unit, and as you'll find out when we get to the driving, it is very seamless how it all works together. It's fantastic. There's a couple of fake engine noises, but all you care about from this bit are the headline figures. So that is 340 kilowatts, 700 Newton meters, 0 to 100 Ks in 5.1 seconds, and a 14.3 kilowatt hour lithium ion battery that gives this car around 51 Ks of electric only range. So here's the rub with plug-in hybrids. That 3.3 litres per 100k figure is fanciful. You're very rarely going to get that in the real world because this kind of ADR test just doesn't work for this kind of powertrain. So here's some real world figures for you. On our test, we travelled 46 Ks on electric power alone, 5 Ks short of the rating. For petrol usage, the 75 litre fuel tank would mean that at the 11 litres per 100 Ks we saw on test, you would get 630 Ks from a full fuel tank. More realistic country cruising would see 750 to 800 kilometres from a full tank and full charge of the battery. Now you may be thinking 11 litres per 100 Ks is a lot worse than the rating, but if you're using plug-in hybrid properly, then that electric range should still be a very big benefit and sort out the discrepancy there. The diesel was unsurprisingly consistent. We saw 8 litres per 100 Ks compared to 7.3 litre per 100k rating. So one thing about these Volkswagens that's really impressive is, even though they're nearly 4.9 metres long, the diesel models are 2.2 tonnes, they still manage to shrink around you just like a Golf does. The steering has a lot to do with that. It's very pure, very accurate, and you know, it's a big SUV, so it's not the last word in feedback, but it gives you the confidence to place the car beautifully and accurately on the road, which is not something that can be said for all of this vehicle's rivals. I am very much looking at you, Jeep Grand Cherokee. Now, apart from that, the 170 TDI is pretty much unchanged. 5-link struts up front, 5-link multi-link rear suspension setup in the rear, which carries across the range. You've got a spring for the 210 TDI in either elegance or R-line trim to get air suspension. The R-line builds on that with 4-wheel steering and active roll center stabilization, which are interestingly 2 features absent from this range-topping R model, even though it's the most performance-oriented. Apparently the battery and motor packaging meant that Volkswagen was not able to fit 4-wheel steering and active roll correction on the flagship R. So there's an interesting little tidbit, but the R is what we're here to talk about because it's the most interesting vehicle, and it's better, surprisingly, than the 170 TDI around town. I say surprisingly. You would expect that from an electric motor. The 100 kilowatt, 400 Newton meter item is actually really quite adequate to get this 2.4 ton SUV motivated up to about 60 k's an hour and keep up with traffic, squirt through traffic lights around roundabouts. It doesn't feel like you're really missing out. There are 2 drive modes, mainly for the motor. They're accessed by pressing this little button down here. You've got E mode and you've got hybrid. Hybrid, you can also set the target charge levels so you can maintain battery levels for when you get into town. Nice little thing, and it's a fun game to play to maximize your battery and your range and everything when you're out in the country on a slightly boring straight road like this. And it works really well. As I was saying, around town, the drivetrain works beautifully, but also the air suspension. Even though it's got 22-inch alloy wheels and sportier tires, there's no bump thump really around town. It deals with humps, ridges, expansion joints beautifully. It's a very comfortable, composed, nice car in town. And then when you get out on roads like this, you go from comfort into normal or even into sport on some twistier roads, and you get to enjoy the R bit of this vehicle, which is to say the fun bit. Now, although it's Volkswagen's most powerful production vehicle ever, funnily enough, it doesn't deliver its punch in the same way a petrol or diesel engine would. It's really rapid and it pushes you back in the seat, but because there's that little bit of torque feel that comes from the electric motor, it's a more sort of seamless sweeping along experience. It's quite nice. It's very unique, it's very different, and as you may have been able to hear there is a little bit of sound feedback to make you feel like you're in a slightly sporty vehicle. It's no Tiguan or Golf R in terms of sharpness in the front end and oral theatre, but horses for courses. This is a large SUV designed with comfort first and foremost in mind, and it absolutely excels at that. It shrinks around you when you go through tight twisting corners with amazing amounts of talent and grip, no doubt thanks to those 285 wide tyres that are going to be very expensive to replace, but what Volkswagen has managed to do with this Touareg R is really impressive. Would I go for this plug-in hybrid powertrain over the 210 TDI diesel R-Line with the air suspension and active roll centering and 4-wheel steer? I'm not entirely sure. I think if I lived where I lived right now, which is in inner Sydney, with a place to charge this vehicle, it's a great idea, and it means you can honestly drive on zero emissions motoring 90% of the time and use that lovely petrol V6 when you go out in the countryside on a weekend or go on a nice touring holiday. But I think for most people, those who live in an area more like this, who are going to use a vehicle like this for towing, touring, horse floats, that sort of thing, I do still think the 210 TDI is going to be the pick of the range, but this R model definitely has a sporty character, an interesting flavour, and will suit those who are really interested in the plug-in hybrid technology, which, as I mentioned before, Volkswagen is very, very good at putting into a car. The Touareg was awarded 5 stars in 2018 ANCAP safety testing. The facelift builds on the existing safety suite with enhanced road sign recognition, optional head-up display and night vision. For the full detailed safety list, head over to carsguide.com.au for the full written review. The Touareg R is covered by Volkswagen's standard 5-year unlimited kilometre warranty. The battery is warranted for 8 years and 160,000 kilometres on top of that. Servicing is due every 12 months or 15,000 kilometres, and the brand will sell you care packs for 3 years costing $2,050 and 5 years costing $3,400. For detailed servicing info, head over to the written review at carsguide.com.au. The facelifted Touareg has improved subtly across the range. From the 170 TDI up to the brand new flagship, all the cars are a little bit better, but the real headline is the pricing has come down to a level that seems very, very competitive with rivals, and it's going to make the Touareg a lot harder to walk past in the large SUV space. But what of the R? Does it feel like a real performance flagship for the brand? Well, it's powerful, it's slick, it drives brilliantly, and it still has that daily capability thanks to that very compliant air suspension. It still, though, isn't the car for everyone. I don't think plug-in hybrid is going to suit every use case, but for those who it does suit, they're going to find it absolutely fantastic.